turkey farm sued me after I showed where their heirloom turkeys actually come from. Diestel Turkey Ranch was Whole Foods' top-rated free-range family farm, but the company had set up a sham farm used for marketing videos, while its real farm was a crowded industrial operation where animals were literally rotting to death. When I walked into the farm with a camera and exposed the scam, the company sued me for rescuing 2 sick turkeys. And amazingly, a judge awarded the company $300,000 after she forgot to give me a trial.
Wednesday, I'm going to court where my prosecutors will argue that I should be placed under a gag order, restricting my speech about my criminal case. I'm currently facing felony and misdemeanor charges for rescuing 4 criminally abused chickens from Purdue's Petaluma Poultry Slaughterhouse. This gag order is just another attempt to keep criminal animal cruelty in the dark and scare people who want to rescue animals from abuse.
This company took $45 million in taxpayer funds, then left its animals to starve to death. Over 1 million birds were left to starve to death after Pure Prairie Poultry in Iowa shut down and stopped feeding its animals. The company had just received $45 million in taxpayer funds to expand its slaughter operation. But it took the money, then declared bankruptcy, and then decided that it could not afford to pay for the animals' food. Birds were left in crowded cages for 5 days without food and water. Some resorted to cannibalism to survive.
And yet I fight this battle all alone.
Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Here it's me here, Comrade Lavender here, and today I'm back with another anti-capitalism deep dive true crime YouTube video topic. Today I want to do the anti-capitalism topic of pure evil, how big agriculture and the FBI spied on animal rights activists and wants them treated as terrorists to protect capitalism profits, how the farm industry spied on animal rights activists and pushed the FBI to treat them as wild terrorists to protect capitalism interests, and how the police only serve capitalism interests. Deep dive, animal abuse, propaganda, vegan activists, etc. So let's get started on this YouTube video topic. But before we get started, all my YouTube videos are going to be down in the are going to be on the screen right now. If you'd like to check them out, all my farming, agriculture videos that relate to this topic are going to be on the screen right now. If you'd like to check them out after you watch this video, they're going to be on the screen right now. If you want to check out my other, animal rights topics that I've covered on my YouTube channel, such as other, like, farming, deep dive YouTube videos I've done, or, like, other industries related to animals. So let's get started on this YouTube video topic.
There's this video, which I kind of feel bad about.
And some woman comes and storms through the door, and throws her drink on me.
I don't think that's cool, but also, FAFO, you're out there disrupting shit. I'm sure you weren't just hanging out, It's unfortunate. I do not condone that, obviously, but there's a little thing called FAFO.
So when the suffragettes were beaten by police and enraged males for defending their right to vote, that was just a classic case of FAFO, right? They dared to challenge the status quo, so violence against them was justified. Seems like a convenient way to justify brutality for people trying to fight for justice.
So we went from no cannibalism to little cannibalism to weekly cannibalism in just 10 minutes. Last Friday, the owner of Sunrise Farms, a major egg supplier to Whole Foods, went on the stand to accuse me of stealing his animals and interfering with his business. When he was examined by the state initially, he said, "The animals here are treated so well. We're inspected by Whole Foods. There are no sick and injured animals at this farm." But when I cross-examined him and showed him some of the records from inside the farm, he went, "Okay, maybe there's a little cannibalism." And then we pulled out the actual records that showed every week there are birds eating each other alive. He finally conceded, okay, it's weekly. But it's not mass cannibalism. Not every bird dies at my farm from cannibalism. But how many birds cannibalizing each other does it take for it to be a problem? Is it 1 billion? Well, they have 200,000 birds in a single building at Sunrise Farms. Thousands of them are likely eating each other alive, and consumers deserve to know this.
So, internal documents reviewed by Wired revealed top lobbyists and representatives of America's agricultural industry led a persistent and often covert campaign to surveil, discredit, and suppress animal rights organizations for nearly a decade, while relying on corporate spies to infiltrate meetings and functionality serve as an informant for the FBI. The documents, mostly obtained through public records requested by the nonprofit Property of the People, detail a secretive and long-running collaboration between the FBI's weapons of mass destruction and WMDD, whose scope today includes Palestinian rights activists and the recent wave of arson targeting Teslas, and Animal Agriculture Alliance, the AAA. a nonprofit trade group representing the interests of U.S. farmers, ranchers, veterinarians, and others across America's food supply chain. Since at least 2018, documents show the AAA has been supplying federal agents with intelligence on the animal rights activists and animal rights groups such as Direct Action Everywhere, with records of emails and meetings reflecting the industry's broader mission to convince the authorities that animal rights activists are basically terrorists and bioterrorism threat to the United States. Spies working for the AAA during its collaboration with the FBI went undercover at activism meetings, obtained through photographs, audio recordings, and other strategic material.
In the chicken slaughtering industry, the term cadaver has a different meaning. Also called red birds, cadavers refers to chickens who drown in scalding hot water during the slaughter process. It is easy to tell when this happens because their skin turns an angry red. Their bodies are typically condemned, meaning that they are disposed of. At Purdue's Petaluma Poultry Slaughterhouse, a pile of dead chickens with this bright red skin was found. They had been boiled alive. Under California law, it is illegal to subject any animal to needless suffering. Boiling someone alive is certainly needless and undeniably causes suffering. When I sent a report to Sonoma County law enforcement regarding multiple violations of animal cruelty law at Purdue's Petaluma Poultry, all I received in response was a dismissive email from the district attorney's office. After seeing their lack of action, I rescued 4 sick, suffering chickens from the slaughterhouse and got them veterinary care. Poppy, ivy, aster, and azalea were covered in scratches and bruises and infested with parasites. For rescuing them, I faced up to 5.5 years in prison for alleged theft and trespass. During my preliminary hearing, we heard testimony from Petaluma detective Corey Jerger. She acknowledged that boiling an animal alive would be animal cruelty. She also admitted that I reported to her that there were chickens being boiled alive at Petaluma Poultry. She admitted to ignoring a voicemail from my attorney offering additional evidence. She said that she never looked further into my allegations and that the Petaluma Police Department has never investigated any of my animal cruelty reports. Apparently, they're too busy prosecuting animal rescuers. You can ask the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office to prosecute animal cruelty, not animal rescue, by going to righttorescue.com or by clicking the link in my bio.
The group's ties with law enforcement were leveraged to help and shield an industry actors from public scrutiny, to press for investigations into its most powerful critics, and to reframe the purpose and efforts of animal rights protesters as a singular national security threat. The records further show that the state authorities have cited protests as a reason to conceal information about disease outbreaks at factory farms and in the factory farm industry from the public. So Rosenberg, a UC Berkeley student, graduate, and animal cruelty investigator at DXE, says she's hardly surprised that powerful private sector groups are working to surveil the organization, but she finds their work with the police paradoxical.
I was thrown in jail for rescuing this dying hen whose skeleton was melting away. But not only would I do it again, I want you to join me. Libby was collapsed on the floor of Sunrise Farms when we found her in May 2018. Her bones had lost all their calcium from being forced to lay 300 eggs a year, and she was too weak to even stand. According to documents we found at the farm, many birds in Libby's condition were being cannibalized. This is a violation of industry standards and California law. When I tried to report this cruelty to the authorities, they arrested me. Last November, I was convicted in jail for helping birds like Libby who were too sick to stand. You know things are bad when a company is hiding its shit, literally. Ridgeland Farms, a massive beagle experimentation facility facing allegations of cruelty, just filed legal papers demanding that all court proceedings be closed to the public and sealed. This is part of a long history of Ridgeland and other vivisectors attempting to cover up the truth.
If anyone should have their ear on law enforcement, it's the animal cruelty investigators exposing rampant violations of the law, leading to real animal suffering and horrific deaths. She tells Wired Zoe faces several felony charges, including burglary and theft, for taking and rescuing 4 criminally abused chickens from Petaluma Poultry in June 2023 and getting them vet care they desperately needed and put in an animal sanctuary. Petaluma Poultry is owned by Purdue Farms. If convicted, she faces up to 5.5 years in prison, all for the crime of rescuing abused animals. If this was a puppy mill, abusing dogs, or Class B dealers, violating the Animal Welfare Act, the FBI would, be on the scene rescuing the abused dog and taking evidence. But because it's a billion-dollar company abusing livestock animals for food, and because the Animal Welfare Act doesn't protect animals from abuse, Zoe is seen as a criminal that's interfering with, capitalism profits, because all the police do is serve capitalism interests and protect capitalism interests. They are the enemy of the working class. Zoe says that she intentionally took the chickens that seemed like they needed the most medical attention and care. Subsequent examinations found that all 4 birds were infested with the Codelia parasites. One of them also had a respiratory infection and an injured toe, while a third had a foot infection. Petaluma Poultry, a subsidiary of chicken giant Purdue, presents itself as a humane operation where, in the words of its website, chickens are free to be chickens. But its advertising is a classic example of humane washing, when companies try to appeal to animal welfare-minded consumers by depicting their products as more humanely raised and produced than they actually are.
Today we find out if people sued by factory farms have the right to defend themselves in court. I rescued sick baby turkeys from this Whole Foods factory farm. Some of them were literally suffocating to death from the fumes in the shed. But instead of addressing the cruelty, Whole Foods and its supplier Diestel sued me. And a judge issued a $300,000 judgment against me after forgetting to have a trial. You see, the original judge got sick, and the new judge, Julia Spain, didn't realize that the scheduled trial had not happened. But she imposed a $300,000 judgment against me anyways, after finding me liable for rescuing 2 dying baby birds from the farm. This is the most unconstitutional and frankly hilarious decision I've seen in my nearly 20 years of legal practice. It is also a glaring example of corruption. So today we're going to argue for the Constitution and sanity. I'll update you all on how it goes afterwards.
Here's the bill for the Whole Foods chickens. $582,000.
What the f***?
I was jailed for rescuing dying animals from these massive poultry farms in California. This little bird was so sick she couldn't stand. She died just a few hours after we took her to the vet. But according to the industry, these are the most valuable birds in history. They're seeking over $500,000 in restitution as part of my punishment for rescuing the birds.
Petaluma Poultry and its contractors have been accused of criminal animal cruelty on a number of occasions, and footage filmed by undercover investigators in the company's farms and slaughterhouse paint a much different picture than the company's own marketing. The allegations against Petaluma Poultry may sound extreme, but in fact, many are on par for the course on factory farms, and chicken farms in particular. For instance, the USDA estimates that every year, around 825,000 chickens are boiled alive at slaughterhouses. Nobody is held responsible or charged with any animal abuse crimes. These companies get away with it on a daily basis, and the police are useless as usual for their part. Zoe maintains that her actions were legal. She cites the doctrine of necessity, a legal theory holding that if it's sometimes permissible to break the law, if doing so prevents even more harm from occurring or being done. In addition to minor charges such as trespassing, she was also hit with a felony count of conspiracy to commit those misdemeanors, a discautionary charge that Sonoma County prosecutor justified by portraying Rosenberg Zoe as a biosecurity threat risk in light of avian flu. According to Zoe, DXE relies on biosecurity protocols that go above and beyond industry standards, including quarantining its investigators from birds for a full week before and after entering farms. All of our investigations before entering a facility shower with hot water and soap and put on freshly washed clothes that have been washed thoroughly and dried on high heat to kill the viruses and bacteria, she says. Everything is sanitized and then sanitized again upon leaving the facility. To gather intelligence on DXE, records show the Animal Agriculture Alliance has surveilled the group for years. Confidential documents obtained separately by Wired reveals undercover operators for the AAA embedded within the animal rights group and fed the trade organization daily reports about protests and meetings, as well as photographs, audio recordings, and other documentation. During a November 2018 meeting, AAA board members discussed attended DXE events to develop protective information, adding that they are already in contact with a security company that had previously attended DXE's training. At a managers' meeting the following April, the group disclosed that it wanted to hire someone to attend the DXE conference in Berkeley, California. Minutes before the meeting showed the total price would be about $4,500. A confidential report authorized several months later by an undercover on an assignment from private intelligence firm Afimat Global reveals the results of the operation. Another confidential report not attributed to a specific intelligence firm shows that AAA would again infiltrate the DXE conference in 2021. The report identifies members of DXE and other attendees, including Rosenberg, and describes interviews with activists and observes about how their protest activities as a regulatory conference in early 2018. The AAA had delivered to a talk about terrorism and activist groups. Internal AAA documents show that within a few months, the FBI contacted AAA with a request. They reached out to us to give us a few weeks ago and asked for the records of activist incidents on farms. Saying notes from a meeting that May. At the same meeting, members discussed their difficulty getting prosecutors to charge animal activists with crimes, with one industry representative saying the issue was their lack of legal standing. The rep suggested calling on law enforcement to deploy terrorism charges instead, as one national pork producer had reportedly considered. The AAA had already been in contact with the FBI about the situation, the notes claim. Records show that in the spring of 2019, the AAA moved to establish a firmer connection with the FBI in an email to the Bureau. In May, the group's then president and CEO, K. Jonathan Smith, noted that having met Stephen Goldsmith, a veterinarian at the FBI's WMDD a month earlier at a conference aimed at strengthening ties between the government and the agricultural sector. The email goes on to remind Goldsmith of her presentation at the event concerning DXE, an extremist group, she wrote, that has executed several mass protests on farms, in retail stores, and in restaurants. Smith then called on the WMDD to help the AAA share information about DXE with the law enforcement officials nationwide, claiming the group is planning an extremist campaign. Smith passed along an alert about an upcoming DXE protest, a march from a local police station to a nearby grocery store, asking if the FBI would connect the group with law enforcement officials nationwide. Goldsmith forwarded the alert to another FBI official, who forwarded it along to several more before eventually reached a counterterrorism center in Washington and a federal investigator with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. The WMDD issued a intelligence memo roughly of 3 months later titled Animal Rights Extremists Likely Increase the Spread of Virulent Newcastle Disease in California, saying with high confidence claims that violent extremists were likely to spread VND, a highly contagious and often fatal disease that affects birds, in the near term by neglecting biosafety procedures. The FBI highlighted 2 instances in which it claimed there was no evidence of activists following proper protocol analysis at the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, the NCRIC, a multi-agency hub that supports law enforcement, soon threw cold water on the FBI's claims. Animal rights activists are probably not responsible for any identified VND incidents in the state, the NCRIC said less than 4 months later, citing federal scientific research records first obtained by the Transparency Group distributed denial of secrets show. The agency further noted that despite the law enforcement's claim that DXE almost certainly violated biosecurity protocols, police reports showed activists had taken biosecurity precautions to prevent contamination or spread of disease. That some fall Goldsmith chemical biological countermeasure unit within the WMDD quietly circulated a preservation to state law enforcement officials pointing to unsubstantiated reports that PETA, the People for the Ethical Group of Animals, the animal rights nonprofit, had played some sort of role in the 2015 avian bird flu outbreak, allegedly collecting contaminated carcasses in an effort to spread the virus. Goldsmith had already previously dismissed a similar claim while working for the same unit 4 years prior. A trade publication paraphrased the FBI official in 2015, telling a crowd there is no evidence of that actually happening. By the end of 2019, the Animal Agriculture Alliance was relying heavily on bioterrorism claims to justify calls for law enforcement intervention to gain the attention of local police in California, and the state's Rural Crimes Task Force, the AAA, contacted Michael Payne, a outreach coordinator at the Western Institute for Food Safety and Security at UC Davis. One of its members, they said, had heard from an identified trucker who was growing increasingly frustrated with animal rights activists, and the driver's concerns extended to bioterrorism. In a February 2021 email, the group provided the WMDD office information on 3 events that DXE and other activist groups had planned, including a Zoom class and a vigil at a pork processing plant for Regan Russell, an activist unalived in 2020 by a livestock transport truck outside of Ontario's slaughterhouse. Goldsmith circulated the AAA's tips to several FBI agents, as well as supervising as a special inspector in the Animal Health Branch of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Several federal agencies said that at least 27 state and local police departments received the email. At least 10 agricultural trade groups and lobbyists were copied. Ryan Shapiro, an executive director at the Property of the People, says that hundreds of records amassed by his organization offer an unprecedented look about how big agricultural lobbyists allegedly tried to conceal incidents of animal cruelty and disease and targeted law enforcement agencies specifically for capture. This is a shameless assault on civil liberties, human health, and basic decency. He says, when you have that many animals packed so tightly in a shed, they can't stand up, they can't turn around, they can't spread their limbs. They are pressed up against each other in their own filth, in dirty conditions, in their own sickness. Of course, disease is going to be rampant and running rampant at factory farms. The furor over DXE's activism within the animal agriculture industry reached a fever pitch 2 months later with the launch of Project Counterglow, an online interactive map of more than 27,000 farms and animal agriculture facilities drawn from public regulatory and business records reported by individual activists and artificial intelligence that scanned satellite imagery to reveal previously unknown facilities. Citing Project Counterglow the following month, the Food Protection and Defense Institute, a university-based construct working alongside the Department of Homeland Security, disclosed a memo that the FBI and AAA had jointly profiled the current risk environment at an industry-government coordinating event within days of the map's launch. According to the memo, the FBI was in the process of supplying the AAA with a list of WMDD coordinators with the women members were encouraged to share knowledge about activists. Preventing animal rights activists from learning about outbreaks has times taken priority over notifying the public about them. Emails from 2023 show officials at the USDA and California Department of Food and Agriculture discussing how to best delay news about highly pathogenic avian flu detected at 2 Samoan County farms, a state official having previously warned that protesters were more likely to be in the area. The solution put forth by the USDA official was to simply not enter the information into the state's emergency management response system, delaying the alert for at least another 3 days, much longer, and it raises too many questions. They said at least 250,000 of birds were culled around the time of the emails. A year later, the CDFA released a report that pointed the finger at protesters, alleging that it was plausible they may have spread the virus. A crisis response plan crafted by Washington State Livestock and Agriculture Group, obtained through a public records request, notes that federal government policy is to assume that any animal disease outbreak or large-scale food contamination incident is an intentional act until proven otherwise. When rumors about cattle being poisoned or intentionally infected with a virus began circulating around the Washington State Department of Agriculture and other agencies, the claims were put to rest by the head of a field diary investigative unit out of Washington State University, whose team discovered a serious outbreak among several herds of yearling cattle. An investigator noted while the cattle owner was convinced the outbreak was sabotage from animal rights activists and groups, other probable sources were clearly present. The investigator said his team spent a lot of time trying to convince the ranchers and the farmers that the disease outbreak most likely had nothing to do with bioterrorism, and it most likely had to do with the husbandry and management issues which were laid out very clear for them. But ranchers and farmers, he said, seemed to prefer the follow conspiracy. After reading this, the WSDA official told the others in the email chain to keep this information private and to not forward it on. The AAA, meanwhile, has worked for years to keep its communications with the government secret from the public, moving documents subject to record requests behind a password-protected link. In 2018, records show the same year, it joined a coalition of food industry groups in a filing in an ambulance brief with the U.S. Supreme Court aimed at limiting public access to corporate records under the Freedom of Information Act, expressing enthusiasm as the time that the court's conservative majority would back its play. Animal activist groups routinely use the FOIA to obtain confidential information submitted to the government. A meeting agenda from the time reads, the case ultimately decided the food industry's favor, redefined the meaning of confidential under FOIA to include information that the industry itself decided should be private.